The gym was a sanctuary, but tonight it felt like a battlefield. Malik's heart thundered as he pushed through the last set of deadlifts, sweat dripping onto the rubberized floor of the Seattle Fitness Center. He wasn't just lifting weights, he was fighting for something bigger, something he couldn't name. At 25, Malik Washington had spent most of his life running. Not from danger, but from himself. Growing up in a small town in Georgia, he'd learned early to keep his head down, to hide the parts of himself that didn't fit the mold of a preacher's son. Football had been his escape, a way to channel the chaos inside him into something the world praised. But when a torn ACL ended his college career, he'd fled to Seattle, chasing a fresh start in a city that felt like it could hold all his contradictions. Now, 3 years into a new life, he was a personal trainer by day and a CrossFit athlete by night, sculpting his body into a fortress while his heart remained a locked room. The gym clock read 9:47 p.m. The place was nearly empty, save for the hum of a treadmill in the corner and the clank of weights being racked. Malik dropped the barbell, his muscles screaming, and glanced at the man spotting him. Coach Javier Morales, 32, was a force of nature, broad-shouldered, with a quiet intensity that made people listen when he spoke. His deep brown eyes held a warmth that contrasted with his no-nonsense training style. Javier had moved to Seattle from San Antonio a year ago, taking over as head coach of the CrossFit box. His reputation as a former Marine-turned-fitness guru preceded him, but it was his ability to see through people's walls that unnerved Malik. "Form's looking solid, Malik," Javier said, his voice steady but laced with something deeper, like he was reading more than Malik's technique. "But you're holding back. What's got you distracted tonight?" Malik forced a laugh, wiping sweat from his brow. "Just tired, coach. Long day." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The truth was a tangle of feelings Malik couldn't unravel. Feelings that surged every time Javier's hand steadied his back during a lift or their eyes met for a second too long. He'd spent months convincing himself it was admiration, not attraction. Javier was his coach, his mentor, nothing more. But the way Javier's gaze lingered now, searching, made Malik's pulse race for reasons he wasn't ready to face. They moved to the stretching area, the gym's fluorescent lights casting long shadows. Javier knelt beside Malik, guiding his leg into a deep hamstring stretch. The touch was professional, precise, but it sent a jolt through Malik's body. He focused on the floor, on the rhythm of his breath, anything to keep his mind from spiraling. Javier's hands were steady, but his voice was softer now, almost hesitant. "You know," he said, "you don't have to carry it all alone." Malik froze. The words hit like a punch, cracking the armor he'd built over years. He wanted to ask what Javier meant, but fear glued his lips shut. Instead, he muttered, "I'm good, coach," and stood, brushing off the moment like dust. But Javier didn't let it go. As Malik grabbed his gym bag, Javier stepped closer, his voice low. "Malik, I see you. Not just the athlete, the man. And I'm not going anywhere until you're ready to talk." Malik's breath caught. He stood there, bag slung over his shoulder, the weight of Javier's words heavier than any barbell. For the first time in years, he felt seen, and it terrified him. The next morning, Malik woke to a text from Javier. "Meet me at Discovery Park, 6 p.m. No workout, just talk." His stomach churned. He spent the day distracted, replaying Javier's words, wrestling with the truth he'd buried since he was a teenager. He'd grown up hearing that love like his was a sin, a flaw to be fixed. Moving to Seattle had given him freedom, but not from the shame that clung like damp air. Now, Javier's invitation felt like a crossroads, run again or face whatever this was. Discovery Park was alive with the hum of evening joggers and the rustle of leaves. Malik found Javier on a bench overlooking Puget Sound, the water shimmering under the fading sun. Javier's casual posture. Jeans, A fitted jacket, his hands clasped loosely, belied the intensity in his eyes. Malik sat, leaving a careful distance between them. "You didn't have to come," Javier said, his voice gentle but firm. "But I'm glad you did." Malik stared at the horizon, his throat tight. "Why'd you ask me here, coach?" Javier leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Because I've been where you are. Hiding. Pretending. I came out at 28, after years of thinking I could outrun who I am. I see that same fight in you, Malik. And I'm telling you, you don't have to fight alone." The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through Malik's defenses. He wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but Javier's gaze held him in place. For the first time, Malik let himself wonder, what if he stopped running? Malik's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles pressing against the rough wood of the bench. The air was cool, carrying the salt of the sound, but his skin felt too tight, like it might split under the weight of Javier's words. He wanted to bolt, to lose himself in the rhythm of a sprint, but something in Javier's steady presence anchored him. "I don't know what you're talking about," Malik said, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. It was a weak defense, and he knew it. His eyes stayed fixed on the water, avoiding Javier's gaze. The horizon blurred, not from the fading light but from the tears he refused to let fall. Javier didn't push. He leaned back, giving Malik space, his silence more powerful than words. "When I was in the Marines," he said after a moment, "I thought I could bury it, be the toughest guy in the room, and no one would ask questions. But it eats you up, Malik. Hiding who you are, it's like holding your breath. You can only do it so long before you break." Malik's chest tightened. He'd spent years perfecting the art of holding his breath, smiling for his clients, joking with his gym buddies, playing the role of the confident athlete. But alone, in the quiet of his studio apartment, the truth clawed at him. He'd dated women, tried to feel what he was supposed to feel, but it was like trying to force a key into the wrong lock. The attraction he felt for men, the one he'd buried under shame and scripture, kept surfacing in dreams, in glances, in moments like this. "I'm not, I can't be," Malik said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "My family, my dad, he's a pastor. If I'm what you think, it'll destroy them." Javier's expression softened, but his voice held an edge of conviction. "Your family's love shouldn't come with conditions. And if it does, that's their burden, not yours. You deserve to live, Malik, not just survive." The words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Malik thought of his father's sermons, the way his voice boomed about righteousness, about sin. He thought of his mother's quiet prayers, her hope that he'd find his way. He'd left Georgia to escape that weight, but it followed him, a shadow he couldn't outrun. Javier shifted closer, his shoulder brushing Malik's. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a current through Malik's body. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers," Javier said. "I'm just asking you to stop pretending with me." Malik finally met his eyes. Javier's gaze was steady, unguarded, and it cracked something open inside him. For a moment, he let himself imagine what it would be like to lean into that warmth, to let someone see him fully. But fear surged back, cold and sharp. He stood abruptly, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I need time, coach. I can't do this right now." Javier nodded, no judgment in his eyes. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." Malik walked away, his steps heavy, the park fading into a blur. He spent the next few days avoiding the gym, throwing himself into work, into anything that kept his mind off Javier. But the man's words echoed, relentless. "I see you." The man. Malik couldn't shake the feeling that Javier had seen something he'd spent years hiding, even from himself. A week later, Malik's resolve broke. He showed up at the gym late, after closing, knowing Javier would be there, cleaning equipment or updating client logs. The gym was quiet, the air thick with the scent of rubber and sweat. Javier looked up from the front desk, his expression unreadable. "I didn't think you'd come back," Javier said, setting down his pen. Malik swallowed, his throat dry. "I didn't either. But I need to talk." They sat on the gym stretching mats, the same place where Javier had first called him out. Malik's hands shook as he spoke, his voice low but steady. "I've known for a long time, since I was a kid, but I thought I could change it, pray it away. I thought if I worked hard enough, became someone else, it wouldn't matter. But it does." Javier listened, his silence a safe harbor. When Malik paused, struggling to find words, Javier spoke. "It's not about changing who you are. It's about accepting it. And that's the hardest thing you'll ever do." Malik's eyes burned, but he didn't look away. "What if I'm not ready?" "Then you take it one step at a time," Javier said. "And you don't have to do it alone." For the first time, Malik felt the weight of his secret lighten, just a fraction. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was a start. The gym became a different kind of sanctuary after that night. Malik still trained, still pushed his body to its limits, but now each session carried a new undercurrent, a quiet understanding between him and Javier. They didn't talk about it again, not directly, but Javier's presence was a steady reminder that Malik wasn't alone. A brush of hands during a spot, a shared glance during a group class, a text checking in after a tough day. It was subtle, but it was there, and it terrified Malik as much as it thrilled him. He started noticing things about Javier he hadn't allowed himself to see before. The way Javier's laugh lines deepened when he teased a client. The quiet strength in his voice when he coached someone through a tough set. The way he carried his own history, his time in the Marines, his journey to coming out like a badge of survival. Malik envied that courage, but he also felt it pulling him forward, like a tide he couldn't resist. One evening, after a brutal team workout, the gym hosted a small gathering. A local brewery had sponsored a post-WOD hangout, and the parking lot was strung with fairy lights, tables laden with craft beer and snacks. Malik lingered at the edge of the crowd, nursing a bottle of IPA, watching Javier move through the group. He was magnetic, clapping shoulders, trading jokes, but his eyes kept finding Malik's, a silent question in them. "You're quiet tonight," Javier said, sidling up to him near a makeshift bonfire. The flames cast shadows across his face, highlighting the curve of his jaw. Malik's heart stuttered. "Just thinking," Malik said, his voice low. He wanted to say more, to spill the chaos in his chest, but the words felt too big, too raw. Javier tilted his head, studying him. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" Malik nodded, his throat tight. He took a sip of beer, the bitter taste grounding him. "It's not that simple. I want to be honest. But every time I try, I hear my dad's voice, my mom's, telling me who I'm supposed to be." Javier's expression darkened, not with anger but with empathy. "I get it. My family didn't take it well either. My dad didn't speak to me for a year after I came out. But you know what? I found people who became my family. People who saw me for me." Malik looked at him, really looked, and saw the man behind the coach. Not just the strength, but the vulnerability, the scars. "How do you do it?" he asked. "Live like that, out in the open, when it feels like the world's waiting to judge you?" Javier smiled, a small, sad curve of his lips. "You don't do it for the world. You do it for yourself. And for the people who make it worth it." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Malik felt the pull, the urge to close the distance, to let himself fall. But fear was a stubborn thing, and it kept him rooted, his hands gripping the beer bottle like a lifeline. The moment was broken by a shout from the crowd. Someone had spilled a drink, and laughter erupted. Javier clapped Malik's shoulder, his touch lingering. "Think about it," he said, then rejoined the group, leaving Malik alone with his thoughts. The next few weeks were a blur of training, work, and late-night conversations with himself. Malik started journaling, something he hadn't done since high school. He wrote about his fears, his desires. The way Javier's smile made his chest ache. He wrote about the life he wanted, one where he didn't have to hide. It was messy, raw, but it was honest. One night, after a particularly grueling session, Malik stayed late to help Javier clean up. The gym was quiet, the only sound the clink of weights being stacked. They worked in comfortable silence until Javier spoke. "You've been different lately, lighter. What's changed?" Malik hesitated, then set down the barbell he was holding. "I'm trying," he said, "trying to figure out who I am, who I want to be." Javier stepped closer, his eyes searching. "And who's that?" Malik's breath hitched. He wanted to say it, to name the truth, but the words caught. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing Javier's arm. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a leap off a cliff. Javier didn't pull away. He covered Malik's hand with his own, his touch warm and steady. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "for trying." Malik's heart pounded, but for the first time it wasn't just fear. It was hope. The touch lingered in Malik's mind long after he left the gym that night. It was a tether, pulling him toward something he'd spent years running from. He didn't sleep, his thoughts a storm of what-ifs and maybes. By morning, he'd made a decision. Not a grand one, but a small, deliberate step. He texted Javier, "Coffee tomorrow? My treat." They met at a small cafe in Capitol Hill, a place with mismatched chairs and walls covered in local art. The air smelled of roasted beans and rain, a Seattle staple. Javier arrived in a hoodie, his usual intensity softened by the casual setting. Malik's nerves buzzed, but he forced himself to stay present, to let the moment unfold. They talked about everything and nothing. Javier's love for old-school hip-hop, Malik's obsession with sci-fi novels, the way Seattle's gray skies felt like a hug on some days and a weight on others. For the first time, Malik let himself relax, let himself enjoy the way Javier's laugh made his chest warm. It wasn't a date, not officially, but it felt like one, and that was enough to scare him and thrill him in equal measure. "You're different here," Javier said, stirring his coffee. "Outside the gym. More you." Malik smiled, a real one, not the mask he'd worn for years. "Maybe I'm figuring out who that is." Javier leaned forward, his eyes bright. "I like this version of you." The words were simple, but they hit Malik like a wave. He wanted to reach across the table, to take Javier's hand, but he settled for a nod, his heart racing. They parted with a promise to do it again, and Malik walked home feeling lighter than he had in years. But the lightness didn't last. A week later, Malik got a call from his mother. Her voice was warm but strained, the way it always was when she had news she didn't want to share. "Your father's sick, Malik. Heart trouble. He's asking for you." The news hit like a blow. Malik hadn't been home in 3 years, hadn't spoken to his father in nearly as long. The thought of returning to Georgia, to the house where he'd learned to hate himself, made his stomach churn. But he booked a flight, driven by a mix of duty and guilt. The visit was a minefield. His father, weaker but still imposing, sat in his armchair, Bible in hand, and asked Malik about his life in Seattle. Malik kept it vague: work, the gym, the city. He didn't mention Javier, didn't mention the truth he was starting to embrace. But his father's eyes, sharp despite his illness, seemed to see through him. "You're different," his father said one night, his voice low. Something's changed. Malik's heart pounded. He wanted to tell the truth, to lay it all bare, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he nodded, muttering something about growing up. His father didn't press, but the silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions. When Malik returned to Seattle, he felt raw, like an exposed nerve. He threw himself back into training, but the gym felt different now, charged with the weight of his trip. Javier noticed, of course. During a late-night session, as they stretched side by side, Javier broke the silence. "You're carrying something heavy. Want to share the load?" Malik hesitated, then let it spill. The trip, his father's illness, the fear of disappointing his family. He didn't mention his feelings for Javier. Not yet, but the words felt like a step toward truth. Javier listened, his presence a quiet strength. When Malik finished, Javier reached out, his hand resting on Malik's shoulder. "You're enough," Javier said, "just as you are." The words broke something in Malik, a dam he'd built years ago. He didn't cry, but he felt the release, the possibility of a life where he didn't have to hide. He looked at Javier, really looked, and saw a future he hadn't dared imagine. Weeks passed, and Malik's world shifted. He and Javier grew closer, their connection deepening through late-night talks, shared workouts, and quiet moments that felt like promises. Malik was still afraid, but the fear was quieter now, drowned out by the growing certainty that Javier was worth the risk. One evening, they found themselves back at Discovery Park, the same bench where it all began. The air was crisp, the sky painted with the colors of a fading sunset. Malik sat closer this time, no longer guarding the space between them. Javier's hand rested on the bench, inches from Malik's, and the temptation to close that distance was overwhelming. "I told my mom," Malik said suddenly, the words spilling out. "Not everything, but enough. That I'm figuring things out. That I'm happy." Javier's eyes widened, a smile breaking across his face. "How'd she take it?" Malik exhaled, a mix of relief and nerves. "She didn't say much, just that she loves me. It's a start." Javier nodded, his expression soft but proud. "That's a big step, Malik. Huge." They sat in silence, the sound of the waves filling the space. Malik's heart raced, but it wasn't fear this time. It was courage. He reached out, his hand covering Javier's. The touch was electric, grounding, everything he'd been afraid to want. Javier turned his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm here, for all of it." Malik looked at him, at the man who'd seen him when he couldn't see himself. "I thought you were just helping me stretch," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "But you changed everything." Javier laughed, a sound that warmed the night. "I told you I see you, Malik, and I'm not going anywhere." They sat there, hands entwined, the world fading around them. Malik knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. His father's health, his family's expectations, the weight of a world that didn't always understand. But for the first time, he felt ready to face it, not alone, but with someone who made him feel whole. The sunset dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft glow in its wake. Malik leaned closer, his shoulder brushing Javier's, and let himself believe in a future where love wasn't a battle, but a home.